Hey there, Star Riders. Welcome back to Sincerely Yours, where every chapter is a new adventure. Grab your pen because today we need to talk about Teen Wolf. Now, before anyone start typing essays in my comments, let me say this very clearly. Scott McCall is a good person. Scott McCall is a hero. Scott McCall wants to save everyone, but Scott was also a really bad friend to Stiles Stilinski. And the more I rewatch this show, the more that pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't a hate video, and this isn't me saying Scott is evil. This is me looking very closely at a friendship the show keeps telling us is unbreakable and asking, why does it feel so one sided? Let's talk about it.
All started that night, the night I got bitten. You remember the way it was before that? You and me. We were nothing. We weren't popular. We weren't good at lacrosse. We weren't important. We were no one. Maybe I should just be no one again.
Before the werewolves, before the alphas, before Beacon Hills became the most unsafe zip code in television history, Scott and Stiles were outcasts. They weren't popular, they weren't respected, they were just those two awkward boys orbiting the edge of everyone else's lives. And that matters more than the show really acknowledges. Because when you're an outcast kid, your best friend isn't just your best friend, they're your sense of belonging. For Styles, especially, anxious, hyper aware, grieving his mom, Scott isn't just someone he hangs out with, Scott is home base. Scott is the person who chose him when the rest of the world didn't. So when Scott later dismisses him, doubts him, or emotionally pulls away, it doesn't just sting, it lands deep.
That you and Stiles learned a way to control this. You find an anchor, right? You find your anchor.
My anchor was Allison. I don't have Allison anymore.
Then be your own anchor. You can do this.
Teen Wolf introduces the idea of an anchor, something that keeps you grounded when everything else is trying to pull you under. And even though Styles isn't a werewolf, the show very clearly positions Scott as an emotional anchor for him. Scott represents normalcy, stability, the before Style is terrified of losing. So when Scott starts treating Styles like an obstacle instead of a friend, it doesn't just hurt their friendship, it destabilizes Styles. And once you clock that dynamic, a lot of Scott's later choices start to read very differently.
You killed him? You killed Donovan? And he was gonna kill my dad. Was I supposed to just let him? You weren't supposed to do this. None of us are. You think I had a choice?
Here's where things get really interesting. Scott and Styles don't actually clash because one of them lacks morals. They clash because they were raised with two completely different definitions of what doing the right thing looks like. Scott's moral compass comes straight from his mom, Melissa McCall, a nurse. Her job is to save lives, help everyone, preserve life no matter who they are. So Scott grows up believing mercy is always the highest ground. That belief follows him into everything, and it makes perfect sense that he later becomes a veterinarian. His instinct is always save first, judge later. Now compare that to Styles. Styles was raised by a sheriff, and a sheriff's job isn't to save everyone, it's to protect everyone. Identify the threat, stop the danger early, make the hard call when nobody else wants to. So Styles grows up thinking in outcomes instead of ideals, which is exactly why him becoming an FBI agent later fits so well. Neither of these moral frameworks is wrong, but Scott repeatedly treats his as the only acceptable one, and that's where the friendship starts to fracture.
I think you'd be pretty surprised. Just how grateful I can be.
Let's start early. Season 1, Scott kisses Lydia. And I already know the common defense. The werewolf bite made him do it. But here's the issue. In Teen Wolf, becoming a werewolf doesn't give you brand new thoughts. It amplifies what's already there. Lower inhibition, higher impulse, stronger emotions. Scott knows very clearly that Styles has loved Lydia for years. And yet one of the first things Scott does after gaining power is cross a line he absolutely knows will hurt his best friend. And then to make it worse, he snaps at Styles like Styles is the problem. And I'm gonna be honest. That moment has never sat right with me. Because if there was truly nothing there, no attraction, no buried curiosity, then what exactly was being amplified? Power didn't create that impulse, it just removed the filter. And right there in season 1, we see the first crack. When Scott gains power, Styles' feelings become negotiable. Scott choosing to believe Theo over Styles is not a misunderstanding, it's a decision. A near stranger over the person who has been beside him since childhood. Theo speaks Scott's moral language. He frames Styles as dangerous, as someone who goes too far, as someone who doesn't have the same restraint Scott prides himself on. And instead of checking in with Styles, someone who is clearly traumatized and not okay, Scott judges him. Now, yes, Theo was manipulating the situation, but manipulation only works when it taps into something that already exists. Scott already feared that Styles was capable of crossing lines he wouldn't. So when Scott says, in effect, I believe him, what Styles hears is, I don't trust you. And when that comes from your anchor, that kind of damage doesn't just disappear.
Malia? Kiss him.
What?
Kiss him. Like a river.
Let's talk about Scott and Malia. And listen, my issue is not that people move on. Breakups happen, feelings change, that's life. My issue is the complete lack of emotional awareness. Styles and Malia shared real intimacy, real trauma, real growth. And Scott starts dating her with zero meaningful check in and very little acknowledgement of how this might land with his best friend. It's not explosive betrayal, it's quiet neglect. Scott just, I don't know, assumes Styles will be fine. And by this point in the show, that assumption has become a pattern. And honestly, this is where the pattern becomes really hard to unsee because it's not just about the big moments, it's about the day to day emotional imbalance between them. On rewatch, something really stood out to me. Scott and Styles don't actually spend that much intentional time together unless Scott is in crisis. A lot of Styles scenes, especially in the middle and later seasons, are him researching alone, him solving puzzles, him spiraling by himself, or him supporting someone else in the pack. Meanwhile, when Scott is hurting, Styles is there, immediately, emotionally, fully present. One of the clearest examples is when Scott is losing control from the wolfsbane exposure. Styles is literally willing to die with him rather than leave him alone in that moment.
Okay. You're not no one. Okay, you're someone. Scott, you're my best friend. Okay, and I need you. Scott, you're my brother. Alright, so we're gonna do this, and you're just gonna have to take me with you.
That scene tells us everything about how Styles shows up for Scott. He checks on him, he grounds him, he stays. But when Styles is the one going through something deeply traumatic, the emotional follow through from Scott feels noticeably thinner on screen. after the Nagisune, after the possession, after the Ghost Riders. And I want to be very clear here. This is not me saying Scott didn't care at all. What I am saying is that the show repeatedly gives us scenes of Styles emotionally supporting Scott, but gives us far fewer moments of Scott doing that same kind of quiet, intentional, emotional labor for Styles. And when you line that up with everything else we talked about, the pattern starts to feel hard to ignore because we have to see how quickly Scott locks in emotionally when Allison is in danger or when Kira is hurting. We've seen the urgency, we've seen the panic, so it raises a really uncomfortable question. Why doesn't that same emotional intensity consistently show up when it styles?
I'm right back where I started. Dude, you still got me. I had you before. Yeah, and you still got me. Okay? So life fulfilled.
At, and at the end of the day, this conversation was never really about picking sides. It's not about saying Scott was the worst person in Beacon Hills. It's about recognizing that even good people, even heroes, can fall short in the relationships that matter most. Because when you really sit with Scott and Styles' friendship, you start to notice something uncomfortable. Styles shows up for Scott emotionally, consistently, and almost instinctively, but Scott doesn't always meet him in that same space. And maybe it was intentional writing, maybe it was just the direction the story took, or maybe it was just one of those quiet character dynamics the show never fully realized it created. But I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think Scott was actually a bad friend to Styles? Or do you think the fandom read too much into their dynamic? And on rewatch, did their friendship hit differently for you? I really want to hear your thoughts on this one because I have a feeling the comments are going to be very lively. But don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more out of this world ideas. Until the next entry, keep your pen to the stars and your heart in the pages. Sincerely yours.